The coup will be televised. News of the takeover announced on military-owned television. This video, one of the few to capture the moment a member of parliament was whisked away in a pre-dawn raid. Where to is anyone's guess. Among the many arrested, civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi and other high-ranking members of a ruling party, National League for Democracy. In a statement, she denounced the coup as an attempt to put the country back under a dictatorship, adding, "I urge people not to accept this, to respond, and wholeheartedly to protest against the coup by the military." The dramatic escalation marks the culmination of a bitter dispute over November's general election, an election which saw Suu Kyi's party coast to victory in a landslide, but which the military insists was fraught with irregularities, claims that the country's election commission has dismissed as baseless. News of the coup has drawn strong international condemnations.
It's nothing short of outrageous, deeply disturbing. This is unacceptable. The international community rejects what has happened, that leaders of the world are united in their revulsion of this illegal act.
On the streets of Myanmar, the coup is seen as a sad setback for many, little more than a decade after it celebrated its transition to democracy. I feel the army assaulted the people when it staged this coup on the civilian government, a government elected by our people. Our country's just a bird, learning to fly. Now, the army broke our wings. As Myanmar is catapulted towards an uncertain future, many are rushing to stock up on essentials, bracing for an end to democracy as they know it.
And let's get more now. We are joined by Dave Grunebaum, who is a journalist who spent many years reporting from Myanmar. He joins us now from Malaysia. Dave, what else can you tell us about this coup, how it has been organized, and how it's unfolding?
Yeah, well, you've really got to just begin by pointing to the commander-in-chief of the military, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. He hits the mandatory retirement age of 65 later this year, and it's no secret that he had his eyes on the presidency. But given the results of the November elections, where the National League for Democracy won more than 80% of the available seats and won by a landslide, there really seemed to be no way he could get there legitimately anytime soon. Now, as you said a minute ago, the military was making strong accusations a week ago, saying that there was election fraud. But the Elections Commission rejected. When I say strong, they were being strong about what they're alleging. They didn't show any proof, though, of this. So the Elections Commission rejected, saying there was no widespread voter fraud. And then there were real concerns since last week that we could have a coup. Those concerns seemed to tamp down over the weekend with statements that came out of the military. But then we saw what happened early this morning with political leaders being detained, put under guard, some political activists detained as well.
And how about the people of Myanmar? How is this likely to impact them?
Well, a huge blow to these people. While the military does have some supporters in this, the overwhelming majority of this population clearly supports Aung San Suu Kyi and the National League for Democracy, clearly against this coup. Now, Aung San Suu Kyi, there was a statement released today by the NLD in her name, where she calls the actions to the country puts it back under dictatorship, and Aung San Suu Kyi urging people not to accept this. The question is, are we going to see at some point some real protests, public protests and demonstration by the people? That would be quite a move to make, because this is a country, keep in mind, it spent close to 50 years under a repressive military dictatorship that in some cases not only put down public demonstrations, not only violently, but in some cases using deadly force.
Given all of that background and context, I mean, the military says that they will be taking control for at least a year. Do we have any indications of what they are planning?
So, I mean, things are very opaque in Myanmar, in the military, and it's always been that way. But the military has got to attempt to somehow try to bring some legitimacy to what they're doing. They're talking about what they claim was widespread elections fraud. They're going to have to try to keep bringing that up. But The simple fact is this, is that the people, there's going to be very little changing of minds over this. The people who are with Aung San Suu Kyi believe that the NLD won that election legitimately. They're going to dig in deeper. And the people who support the military, they're going to dig in deeper. So now the military is going to be left as an unpopular leaders in this country. How are they going to manage that? How are they going to manage the economy, which they completely mismanaged during 50 years of junta rule? And how are they going to manage the health crisis going on with the pandemic as well? All questions really up in the air right now.
So many open questions. Dave Grunebaum, putting it into all context for us, though, we really appreciate that.
Sure.
And let's get more now. We are joined by Kaylie Long. She joins us from London from the human rights group Amnesty International. She's a researcher on Myanmar. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us. We understand that Amnesty says this is an ominous moment for Myanmar. What are your fears for the people there?
People on the ground, obviously communications have been patchy, but people are really worried. Myanmar has such a history of brutal military dictatorships, and so for a lot of people there, this rings some serious alarm bells. And you can see that in the response from the international community. The situation, as always, is fluid and kind of unclear at the moment. But this is definitely cause for concern for a military that has such a bad track record with human rights impunity.
Indeed, you've mentioned the reaction. World leaders have, of course, condemned the military's actions. But what can the international community really do?
This is really going to be a critical moment and a big test for the international community. We've seen over the international accountability for atrocities by the military against the Rohingya in Rakhine State. But at this stage, I think everyone will be watching it very closely and hopefully speaking up on any human rights abuses and violations of international law.
We know that Aung San Suu Kyi has allegedly presided over human rights abuses in Myanmar. Amnesty International is calling for her release. Just give us the background there.
Yes, for many years, Aung San Suu Kyi had been a political prisoner herself, and then we've been very critical of her during her time in government and the human rights violations her government has overseen. So we actually rescinded the award that she was given for being a human rights icon. So now these detentions of the government, of senior figures, do appear to be illegal. And so we're calling for their release unconditionally.
Kaylie Long from the human rights group Amnesty International joining us from London. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. And Maung Zarni is a Burmese academic and human rights activist based in London, joining us now on the program. Dr. Zarni, thank you so much for your time. I understand that you have said that the coup exposed the big lie of fragile democracy in Myanmar. What did you mean by that?
Well, the big lie that we have been fed by the Burmese the military, and in fact, as with the help of Aung San Suu Kyi, is that Burma is democratizing, under the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi. But we, some of us who have studied this, our own country for the last 30 years professionally and also been involved in politics, know this is completely untrue. If you look at the constitution of 2008, which was drawn up and adopted by the military itself, this coup has been preemptively made legal and constitutional. There are 9 pages in this constitution that preemptively legalizes any coup that is deemed necessary by the commander-in-chief on grounds of national security. If you read the Burmese language statements coming out of the office of the commander-in-chief, the chief coup maker, you will know that the military is using the language of national security, not simply, widespread voter frauds. And also, I think this is also a very, very Orwellian coup in that the coup makers call Aung San Suu Kyi and MP-elects selfish, ambitious, anti-democrats that are jeopardizing the democratic system. Therefore, the coup is presented as a move in the right direction.
So where is the hope then, given all of that, for Myanmar right now? I mean, do you have much faith, for example, in the international community's response and the ability to exert pressure on the country?
I am afraid not much hope. I am not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. 10 years and 3 years. Two election cycle, two election cycles since 2010. And the international community, so-called, UN member states, for investors and whatnot, they have failed to end even, what is the textbook example of a full-fledged genocide against, one national minority. And then they cannot be expected beyond, empty condemnations to do anything to reverse this anti-democratic trend. But like I said, the one big casualty, in a way, a good one, is that the big lie that we as a country are moving towards democracy, that has been proven completely untrue by the very military itself. And so that is something that I welcome, although coup is, something that no Democrat would welcome.
A very sobering assessment of what is happening right now in Myanmar. And we thank you so much for joining us, Burmese academic Aung Zarni. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we are joined now by Younghee Lee, former UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar. She is joining us from Seoul, South Korea. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. What is your reaction to what is happening right now in Myanmar?
This is really an outrageous situation, and it's a direct assault to democracy and the Myanmar's people's will when they elected NLD as their second democratic government.
What do you think that this means right now for the country's experiment with democracy? Is there any hope left that we might see some progress on that front?
It's going to put back Myanmar in its strive for democracy for many decades now, I think. And it's really too early to see how situations will unfold in Myanmar. But I really think that the people's efforts to achieve democracy will be set back quite a while.
We've seen international condemnations coming forward from rights groups, from leaders around the world. What do you make of the international community's ability right now to put pressure on the country amid this coup?
Well, I think, first of all, the Security Council needs to convene, and it would be necessary for them to send a delegation into Myanmar to monitor what is really happening and try to engage in some talks with all sides.
You're very familiar with the military. You're also very familiar with the United Nations and its inner workings. That what you've just mentioned there. How do you see, the realistic prospects of the military allowing that into the country?
It will not, but I think, especially with this military coup, there are definite indications that the Min Aung Hlaing, the chief commander, has been endorsed, had his blessings from China and from Russia. And so the two permanent members of the Security Council will not adhere to any request to send a delegation. And I think this is where the international community should really apply more pressure on these two states.
How could they possibly do that? I mean, because as you've mentioned, Myanmar, the military has these two very powerful backers, China and Russia. And do they have any interest in a more democratic Myanmar?
I'm afraid that's where the problem lies. They really do not have any more interest in a democratic Myanmar. And I think this is where the UN is up to another test, and see how the Secretary General navigates his power or his negotiating skills into seeing that for now, once and for all, we will have Myanmar not to go down this dark lane. And this is where the international community failed Myanmar and its people, and the UN has ultimately failed Myanmar and its people.
Presumably, there might be talks at this hour of sanctions similar to the ones that we saw previously on Myanmar. You know, arms embargo we've also seen in the past. Just walk us through those measures and the impact that they have had in the past, and what lessons have potentially been learned for what measures might be considered now going forward.
The targeted sanctions against corporations, economic enterprises held by military, its cronies, and its associates, these will work. And we have seen that they have started to work. And I think this is what scares Min Aung Hlaing, is that once he loses power, his assets, his fortunes will disappear, or he will not have access to his fortunes. And this is what prompted Min Aung Hlaing for this to stage this coup.
Of course, the people of Myanmar are a huge concern at this hour. Can you just walk us through the impact that all of this is likely to have on them?
Well, you know, this is amid the coronavirus pandemic. People have suffered a lot, and for years they suffered crimes against humanity, war crimes, and there was a genocide in Rakhine. And in ethnic states, there still is vibrant war and clashes. And people have already suffered from lack of access to basic fundamental human rights. And now, with this coup, banks are closed, media, news outlets, aside from government news, internet, and there will be another curfew. And so the lives of the people is going to be, people are going to be in a more dire situation. Now, having said this, treatment or testing for coronavirus, I really worry if people will be tested or if people will receive treatment if they're tested positive with coronavirus.
Well, we thank you so much for joining us with that sobering assessment of what is happening right now. Younghee Lee, former UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So what action can the world expect from Germany? Well, Juergen Heart chairs the German Parliament's Foreign Affairs Working Group. He joins us from his constituency in the country's west. Welcome to DW, sir. Beyond condemning what is happening in Myanmar, what action is Berlin proposing?
First, I'm very much disappointed about the situation now in Myanmar. We saw a clear democratic election in November. We have no question marks behind the result of that election. And therefore, we see that the civil powers in that country, the, so to say, also pro-Western powers, are won the election and have the right to build a government. What we see today it gives a lot of question marks. I don't know what other powers might be behind that. In January, there was a visit of the de facto foreign minister of China to the militaries, to the generals in Myanmar. Maybe he has encouraged them to take over power in that country. I ask the European Union to go into detail and behind that what we saw there.
OK. What should Germany do now?
I think on the European level, as the European Union, we should think about personal sanctions against those who are responsible for this situation. We also have to think about our civil economic aid program. We started with a democratic majority and democratic government in Myanmar. This program maybe needs to be postponed or interrupted until a point where we can say we have a new and better situation in the country. But I think it's too early to judge on that at the moment. But these are the questions we have on the table.
What sort of sanctions and against whom?
A normal and effective instrument is to sanction those people who are responsible for this military coup, because they normally in those countries are also traveling around the world. They're using their credit cards and other things. And therefore, we have to be aware that potentially we can sanction them. And the second is that we have a program of economic aid to that country, started with the German GIZ and other organizations. And I'm not in a position now today to say we have to skip that, but we have to go into the details and go behind that. Does it make sense to continue, or should be interrupted until the military step down and give power back to the people?
We heard from a former UN rapporteur on Myanmar a little just before you came on, and we heard from her that its allies, China and Russia, have not played a constructive role in promoting democracy in Myanmar. Can Berlin or should Brussels put pressure on the country's military backers?
This is what I'm also afraid of, that the generals were stimulated by probably the visit of the Chinese head of the communistic foreign department, that they are encouraged to do that, also due to the situation with Corona, where things are not so clear in the region. And if we have a proof for that China or maybe another foreign power is behind that coup d'etat, this might be on the table of the United Nations Security Council and also of the European Union. But at the moment, I think we have no proof for that, but we have a lot of question marks.
OK, so lots of questions. This only happened today. I'd be interested to know how quickly you want people to act. When should sanctions be imposed? When should Germany be re-evaluating its economic assistance to Myanmar?
We will have the topic of the situation in Myanmar on the Foreign Affairs Committee in Germany next Wednesday. I put that on the agenda. I think all the other parties will agree on that. And we'll have a debate on what we have to do. And I also expect a message from the European Union, from the High Representative Borrell, and the foreign ministers of the European Union, because I think it's very necessary that we act together and not as a single action only from Germany. But I think we should use the next 24 hours to develop a common position.
Thank you so much for joining us. That's very clear. Juergen Heart, a member of the German Parliament. Thank you.
Goodbye.